committee to aid the Vermont marble strikers, February 1936. The struggle of the Vermont marble workers belongs in the great tradition of their state's history. The ancient fight for liberty and democracy which gave Vermont its integrity is now theirs. We would be fortunate if we could...
Well, the heat, I'm trying to heat up.
Well.
Is that for us?
Elizabeth Taylor.
So this is great. But Greg gets all the credit for tracking you down.
Well, that was...
Oh, it's the Boxing Hall of
You
Fame.
know, I live on Long Island. I live in Port Washington, in
Oh, you do?
County.
Oh, I see.
And I teach at St. John's University.
Oh, at St. John's?
Yeah, at the law school. That's where I'm based.
Oh, very good.
So
Well,
you're right in my neighborhood.
Yes.
Basically.
Yes. Well, I'm glad to help in any way I can. Of course, I didn't know Jackson. I didn't really work that personally with him, but with his staff.
Right.
Okay, I'm going to start this off, Bud, with, because so little has been written about that period of time, and it's certainly about your involvement, but Court TV.
Yeah.
Court TV in I didn't tell you this, 1995, on the 50th anniversary of the Nuremberg trials,
Yes.
did a 15-hour documentary.
I didn't know that.
And part of that dealt with the film, The Nazi Plan.
Really?
How the trial went out.
Funny, I never heard it.
And
about
Fred
it.
Graham,
Yeah.
who's John Barrett's good friend, mentioned that the Nazi plan was put together by the famous Bud Schulberg.
I'll be damned.
And then the Nuremberg prosecutor who was helping that day says, "Oh yeah, what makes Sammy run?" And they talked about you.
I'll be damned. Funny, no one ever. I'm amazed. No one ever. I never heard about it.
And I found that only after you and I talked.
Huh?
I said, "Well, this is."
I'd like to see that.
So when we get you out the Robert Jackson Center, we're going to show that as a prelude because you're big.
I'll be damned.
You're big time on everything.
I'll be. Could I possibly get a copy of that?
Oh, get in advance, sure.
Great. I never knew about it.
Yeah. Well, let me just lead off with this because I think this is out of that book,
Yeah. Yes.
Nicholas Beck's book,
Yeah.
and it says in April 1946, Schulberg received a commendation from the U.S. Army. It read, "For meritorious service rendered the Office of Strategic Services in this unit from 15 July 1945 to 25 November 1945, Lieutenant J.G. Schulberg, a member of the Field Photographic Branch, with tireless devotion to duty, great vision, and initiative, directed the collection under the most difficult conditions of vast quantities of photographic evidence of German war guilt and crimes against humanity. This evidence, which includes tens of millions of feet of motion picture film, not only assisted materially in the prosecution of the major war criminals, but also has tremendous value to the United States government, intelligence, and research agencies for the establishment of a permanent photographic record of European political and military developments during the past 2 critical decades. By this commendation, Lieutenant Schulberg is hereby authorized to wear the Army Commendation Ribbon by direction of the Secretary of War." You get a ribbon, you're decorated for that which occurred in Nuremberg. How did it all happen?
Well, early in the war, in 1941, the famous movie director John Ford formed a special photographic unit assigned to OSS, and he was a friend of Wild Bill Donovan, and I think it was through him that he set up this rather unique operation, and Ford then recruited for it people he thought would be the best people to serve. It was really an amazing outfit because it had world-famous cinema photographers like Joe August and Greg Toland, who had made, between the two of them, all of the Ford, photographed all of the Ford movies. Daniel Fuchs, the novelist, was there. And so Ford asked me, at that point I was on the point of entering the Marines, and he asked me if I'd be interested, and it sounded fascinating. And so through the war, through 42, 43, 44, I was in that unit, mostly in Europe. And so at the end of the war...
What was your role during that period of time?
Well, we did various projects for the OSS. For instance, we went through the whole OSS undercover agent program. Stayed in that school that's now become the CIA, the headquarters of the CIA.
Right.
And then did various things like I made a training film. At that time, it was so top secret. I was afraid to look at it myself at times. Training film on how to be an undercover agent behind the Nazi lines.
Oh, really?
And
So you can take it.
the last, let's see. Various work like that. Some really interesting stuff. For instance, this is very smart of them. I've never seen a spy, of all the spy movies, I've never seen how it really is, because of the, I had been part of an agent's team, and the agent preparing to drop him in would have, first he would have a captain who just sort of was in charge of him. He took care of him. And then there was someone really like a prop man who gave him all the props he would need, the kind of money he would need, all of that. It was very much like preparing an actor for a part he would play. And then there was someone who just looked after just sort of a companion who kept him happy and walked with him and talked with him, and maybe even went to some town behind the lines with him. There was a pilot and the weatherman, and then there was someone like me who would work on his cover story. And working on a cover story was the same thing really as what a writer does in fiction. You take people that you really know, and out of that make one character that is somewhat like you, but isn't you. And so it was for me. It was it felt like work I'd been doing in the way before the war, in an odd way. I would ask him where he came from, his interests, all of this,
Right.
and then just change it a little bit. And so it was things like that we were doing. We also had the job of, when a German town would fall, we had a very small group, just 2 or 3 of us would try to rush in right away and go to the SS centers or headquarters and try to grab as many papers as we could, that sort of thing.
Did you find that they had documented, just where you'd find the movies and stuff? Would they have any of that there?
What, of the
You went to the SS headquarters and You found the documents. Was part of the documentation pictures and movies? And
Actually, what happened, Greg, is that I found papers, documents, but in going in, I didn't find any actual film. After the war, when the war ended, I wound up in Berlin actually at Donovan's house in Berlin, although he never showed up. Everybody, it was really sort of funny in a way. Everybody was always waiting for, and even the poor Germans were waiting for, where is General Donovan? Right. And we'd always say, well, he's probably coming tomorrow, or something like that. We put the bomb. And winding up there, Ford put me in charge of this job of gathering and presenting the photographic evidence for the trial. At that point, I asked I think it was G2 of the Army, to what POWs they might have from German film work that might help us, especially. So what happened was that two men were assigned, two German prisoners. His name was Kurt von Molo, and the other was a guy called George Rode, R-O-D-E. I learned from them that they had been sort of top UFA film editors before the war, and had been drafted into the SS film department. And from them, I learned for the first time how completely the SS, apart from the Wehrmacht filming, had their own film unit, and would photograph what we would call atrocities. Right. And they told me that they would show them. They used to be called. They called them desserts, because they would be shown at the homes of Goebbels and Himmler, so forth. That's sort of almost like an entertainment after dinner. And now I said, now where is the film? And I said, well, it was always very well hidden, and it was certain. They would put it in kind of actually like tunneling into mountainsides. So I asked them if they could take us there. I forget the names of all the different towns we went to where they directed us. Almost every time we went, the film was actually burning. I began to suspect that were they tipping off people somehow, I don't know how, ahead, because we never found any actually intact. They were always smoldering. We actually took some film out of the fires, like we would have a foot and a half down, from which we could take 3 or 4 frames and even blow them up. Like we found some of SS in Poland, dragging these poor women downstairs, middle-aged fat women, the poor dresses coming up, dragging them downstairs by their feet, things like that. We never found a full film, only these fragments, but it was enough to show what the Nazis were doing.
Now, when you saw this for the first time, Bud, what was your reaction? I mean, you're seeing some of these films. You're one of the first guys to see these things. What was your reaction to that?
It scared me, really. It scared me, and being Jewish myself, I was like, Jesus, what? It just brings you closer. You would be there, or your wife or your mother would be being dragged down those steps. Also, it was a very personal feeling. We had, as that certification said, we had just hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of thousands of feet of bulldozers bulldozing the skeletons and things like that. Just the poor editors were working about 18, 19 hours a day and stuff. It was a damn nightmare because it was like night after night and week after week, just living inside of this. It's still, one is really not able to describe the horror of that whole event. It just, meanwhile, the way I worked with Justice Jackson's staff is that there was an officer, Commander Jim Donovan, was the liaison between me really and what Jackson was actually preparing to use as specific charges in the prosecution. And so what I was asked was that all the film, as we assembled the film, we would run it by Jim Donovan to decide if that would be something that would fit into Jackson's overall plan. And also, an attorney, a very well-known attorney, Ben Kaplan. Do you know Ben Kaplan?
John interviewed him.
I do.
Oh, you did?
Yeah.
Well, I worked with him also on the actual legal details of this. Sometimes it would drive us crazy because things that we thought were very effective, they said no, that for some arcane legal reason it didn't fit that particular item in the.
So did Ben come to the house in Berlin? Was he there with Donovan?
We came down to Nuremberg from. We would come to Nuremberg during the preparation. I would just fly in for the day and see them and then go back. Our film work was being done up in Berlin, but every so often, maybe 2-3 times a week, I would fly it down to run it by Donovan and Ben Kaplan. One time in the basement we found just cans of film up to the ceiling. It looked like 20, 30 cans of film, but we had no idea what it was. And we took it back and started to run it. And it was the trial of all the July 26th plotters, an incredible film. They would show that, what was that, Field Marshal, I can't think of his name at the moment, the Field Marshal in the West, very important Field Marshal who was part of the plot. And he first appears in his full uniform and medals and everything else, and then later on they've taken his medals away, and then his uniform away, and finally his belt away and his pants are falling. The contrast between the way that man looked at the beginning and this wreck of a man at the end was so telling. The same with the priest. There was a Catholic. My memory is failing about the name of the major who actually set the briefcase in.
Stauffenberg.
Yeah, Stauffenberg. Yeah, Stauffenberg. Right. Do you remember the name of the field marshal of the marshal? He was big, very, very high up in the Wehrmacht. I can't think of his name, but anyway, Stauffenberg went to a priest, and in the in the confessional, apparently asked him, "Do you think that it is a moral crime to eliminate someone who is really an enemy to society?" He didn't name the person; he just said an enemy. And this priest apparently, in a way, gave him the green light. He said, "No, I can see some circumstances where it would be morally acceptable. That priest also appears in his cassock, and the judge Fleisler, his name was, screaming at him, just screaming at him. Poor guy. They ask him questions, but they don't let him answer, and they're calling him every insulting German name in the book and screaming at the poor guy. And then later on, later scenes of the film, the priest is brought back out of his cassock, and again, looking, with baggy pants and looking like a poor homeless person, and totally beaten, and almost like maybe not spiritually dead, but when you talk about a dead man walking, they were all, you could see in their eyes that they were dead. So anyway, to cut this short.
Oh no, carry on. This is terrific.
I was very excited with this film. I thought, God, here's another great war crime and stuff like that. Can't wait to get it down to, get it back to Nuremberg. And when I showed some and described it, it was ruled out by, I think, by Chaplain Donovan as that crime was against the wrong people, was not what they were after. I still don't. I didn't agree with it. But who am I to argue the legality with a very good lawyer as Donovan was, and Chaplain, a great lawyer, and they feeling that they knew they were in sync with Justice Jackson as to what would be accepted by the court and what would not be.
Were you involved? There were two showings at the trial. One was the showing of the concentration camp movies, and then subsequently the Nazi plan.
Yeah, yes.
Were you involved in both of those?
Yes, I was. But the Nazi plan was shown, I think that was shown on the very opening day of the trial. I think I think on the very first day.
It was early on, right? Yeah.
We did the Nazi plan.
Yeah.
And then subsequently the concentration camps. The day of the showing the Nazi plan, I got there very very early, partly to be sure that our projectors and everything was in order, and also there was a long table that was the nearest one to the dock where the prisoners were, and so I sort of reserved a seat as close to the dock as I could, and put my stuff down there so that I could watch their faces when we ran the movie. And so I was really fascinated watching them as we showed the movie. And Yodel and Keidel actually turned their seats around with their backs to the screen and wouldn't look at the movie. They simply refused, like, it doesn't involve us like that. Mm-hmm. And others looked almost as if they were enjoying the movie. Mm-hmm. Goering was the smartest of the bunch. It turned out that Goering was kind of a genius. He played the fool in a way, the Falstaff. But I remember the day that Captain Murphy, an analyst, was checking them all out psychiatrically, and he came back to the hotel and said, "Jesus, that Goering is a goddamn genius. His IQ is like 178. Wow. He sort of pretends that he's a playboy, but he's not." And Goering was taking notes. He took the trial very seriously, and was making notes, confirming with his attorney and all the rest of it. Mm-hmm. At the end of it, when the lights came on, Hans Frank had actually passed out. His head was right on the table, unconscious. Just the prosecution, I guess, in truth, could have gone on without the film. That the words, the actual description of their acts was strong enough, but that old line up about a picture being worth 1,000 words is really true. There's something about seeing the damn thing and not just talking about it that it does have an impact.
Oh, sure.
And I think Frank, watching it, just felt I'm on the gallows.
What was Jim Donovan's reaction now that he had worked with you and had presented, which, according to Court TV, was the first time that they can document that a motion picture was used as evidence in a trial?
It was the first time, yes. Yeah.
Was Donovan happy with it? I mean, did you get any feedback?
Yes, he was happy. He was very nervous. I don't know if nervous is quite the right word, maybe extremely overly zealous about the strict legality of it. He was always afraid that something would not be accepted, and because this really was a pioneer effort, and all of our film had to really fit neatly with what they were presenting in the court. Mm-hmm. And so he was very anxious about it, I would say. He called me all the time. Mm-hmm. Another thing that drove me crazy is that they had no, naturally, Justice Jackson and people like Ben Kaplan had no concept of how long it takes to work on a film, assemble film. So when they first were pushing us, the opening of the trial was supposed to be October, and they kept calling and saying, "Is the film ready? Is the film ready?" And I said, "Jesus, night and day." And this poor Bob Parrish and our guys editing, they were really almost going without any sleep. They were sleeping 2 or 3 hours and working, and they were impatient down there, saying they couldn't understand why it wasn't ready. That was always the pressing, and Jim was he was sort of, in a way, he was on a spot, I think. Jim was, about whether this would really work or whether he's just a bunch of Hollywood guys up there making movies. I really think I think there was a lot of skepticism about it. I felt that with Ben Kaplan, although I did feel a sort of a growing appreciation with Ben, and we became quite good friends. Mm-hmm. But at the beginning, I felt he was treating me in a not exactly cynical. What is the word for it? He was this is very questioning, very doubtful, and very exacting about this, wanting it to be. We had to prove that the film was absolutely. Oh, that was another thing that was funny about it. In the beginning, I gathered a lot of film shown in American newsreels, but the burning of books and rioting in the streets and stuff like that, which I thought would serve the prosecution. And I got that all together, and we worked on that quite a bit. And then they said nothing that was shown in America before the war, no American newsreels would be acceptable. And we had to throw all of that stuff out, even though it was very damning.
So the film you used on the Nazi plan was German?
But, yes. Yeah. It had to be German film. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Why not use the newsreels? What was their reasoning?
That they could say that this was American propaganda, like that these were American films and maybe tampered with and God knows what. Mm-hmm. It had to be authentic German film. I went and got Leni Riefenstahl because of her making the.
First of all, who asked you to get Leni Riefenstahl, and how did you know where she was?
Well, I thought that she was a logical target. After all, she had made the most powerful propaganda film that the Nazis had, maybe the most powerful in the world. It is an incredible piece of work, and I knew that she had done other Nazi films, and so frankly, she seemed a logical witness for us.
Right.
I then asked our OSS operatives to track it down. I think they went to G2, the Army intelligence, counterintelligence, and found out where she was. Living in a dacha in a very nice lodge, like on a lake in Bavaria. She was about 25 miles out of Munich, and so I went there with a weapons carrier. An open weapon is always going to bark. Someone must be coming outside. If you wouldn't mind, Professor, to just opening the door for her. I go through this every day. She
Did she know you were coming? Did you give her kind of a heads up?
no, I didn't.
Okay.
No, I didn't. I thought if I did, having been trained some now, that not to if we had any talkers, not to alert anybody, because then they might easily slip away. Let's say, perhaps someone at the door saying she's sick in bed or God knows what. So,
Yeah.
no, I didn't let her know.
So you knock on the door, and how does she greet you?
Some servant came to the door, and I was in my naval uniform, and said I've come to see Miss Riefenstahl, and there was some servant went back in, and then let me in, and she came. She was still quite a handsome woman. There was Newman. She came to greet me alone, and she was very she was pretty apprehensive, and I told her I wasn't going to harm her. Then I just had some. First, I said I just have some questions about your work, and you made some great films and stuff like that. I would like to ask you. And so then she led me into the living room. We sat on a couch together, and she said, she said, you know, I'm very misunderstood by the Americans. And she said, when I went to Hollywood just in the late 30s, everybody loved me there, and a famous producer, Hal Roach, gave a big reception for me. I was
At the point, she didn't know your background at all.
She didn't know I came from Hollywood. I was just a young naval officer, and she didn't know that I'd been part of the when Riefenstahl came to Hollywood. It was true that Roach was giving this big big do for her. And all of the liberal and radical anti-Nazis got together. Everybody was invited. 10 or 12 key people like Frederick March and Melvin Douglas and Dorothy Parker and so forth. All of these people who were very anti-Nazi, each had like 8 or 10 people to call to tell them to boycott the party. So the party was total fiasco, and only the sort of the John Waynes of that time. I think Gary Cooper went, and right-wing people went, but for every 10 who were invited, one came, and it was a total flop of a party. But I didn't say anything about it, and I asked her a few questions about how she prepared the film of the Nazi plan. I also mentioned that there was another much shorter film that she had made on the Nazis. I think it was called Der Tag or something like that. And she gave me the same song and dance about, because people think it was propaganda. It wasn't propaganda. It was just pure art. And I never got along with Goebbels and all this stuff. So I let her talk just about 10 minutes. But in my pocket was a document that was burning a hole in my pocket. I had a document that was ordering you to come to Nuremberg. So I said, "Well, I'm sorry, Mr. Riefenstahl, but I'm afraid I have to bring you. You'll have to just get some things together. I have to bring you to Nuremberg."
Wow.
At that point, she screamed out, "Pucci, Pucci," or something like that. "Pucci, they're arresting me!" She got hysterical, and then out of a door came a little guy. Apparently, this was a husband of his, and she was screaming, "They're arresting me! They're arresting me!" And so I said, "You don't have to be scared because you're not being put on trial as a war criminal, but you are being. But I do have this. This is a subpoena for you as a material witness." That was the official, as a material witness. And so she came in the car with me, in an open car, and a driver. It was a sergeant, for some reason, just a sergeant, and Leni came to Nuremberg. When she found out that she wasn't actually on trial herself, she was pretty cooperative. She would simply point out there were people that we wanted to know their identities in the different films, and why they were so close to Hitler, or why they were not away, and all kinds of things like that. And she was she did what we asked her to do.
I don't think she was ever a witness at the trial, was she, John? She was just a deposition.
Pardon me?
She never went to the trial in the sense of being a material witness at the trial. So
no, she wasn't.
She's got her deposition.
Not at that trial. Yeah, after the war, she was I think she was on trial herself for much lesser crimes. I forget do you remember what she was? She was charged, and I think she was given some sort of a light sentence, and then for a number of years was not allowed to work, and then finally was. But
did you ever have contact with her again after the war years?
No, I didn't. And I resented the fact that she seemed to become reestablished, and especially with women. She started to become a sort of a hero.
She's kind of a feminist
hero.
Right.
And I wrote some letters about that and dissented strongly about that because I thought that she should really, for what she did, I didn't think that she would be, in my heart, my mind, I couldn't really forgive her. And when she was giving me all this crap about how she was just a pure artist, all the pure artists, whether it was all the great German directors, Fritz Lang, who there was endless lists, or whether it was Thomas Mann, they all obviously were going in the other direction and trying to get out, and she was trying to get close as close to Adolf as she possibly could. And it was estimated that the Triumph of the Will, which is a powerful documentary, was worth like 2 divisions of the Wehrmacht. I mean, it really scared a lot of Europe into saying, including people like Lindbergh, to say how could we defeat them? We better get on with them. We could get along with them. It was a powerful damn piece of work.
Who was it at Nuremberg who wanted you to bring her? Who issued the subpoena, or how did that come about?
Well, I just decided that she would be valuable, and then I told Jim Donovan that I would like to have her available, and from that point they took it on.
Okay.
Took it over.
So it was your idea.
It was, yeah,
Okay.
but I don't deserve a lot of praise for that, because anybody working in Berlin in 1945, focusing on film, would certainly put Leni Riefenstahl as number one really. It didn't take any genius to think that we should talk to her to see how she did those films.
Now, she put you on the top of the list of the I Hate Leni Riefenstahl cult.
She did, yeah. This is my wife, Betsy.
Excuse me.
Shirley. No. Hi, Greg Peterson.
Oh, nice to meet
Nice
you.
to meet you.
John Barrett. Nice to meet
Nice
you.
to
Betsy?
meet you. Betsy.
Very nice to meet you.
We're having fun here.
You are?
This guy's the best.
Fantastic. Oh,
How'd you find out about him?
God, that's an interesting.
and this was the last project dear to his heart.
God, it's very. I'd love to read that. I'll take it to bed tonight.
Okay. Okay. Great.
I do my best reading.
We should get back on
Yeah.
back on Bud Schulberg.
That's right. Leni Riefenstahl. We ended up there, and
Actually, I
go ahead, shoot.
had a question about.
She did make me the number one on the enemy list. And
I noticed you wrote a letter to Variety explaining that
yes,
why you were honored to be the chairman of that hate.
I was about to say that. I think it's one of the better honors I've had in my life. I appreciate that.
Go ahead. Jim.
When you were going down to Nuremberg to play the movie at the trial,
Yeah. Yes.
did you screen it for Jackson?
Yes. That's a good question. We had to screen it for Jackson and his staff before we could show it. They scrutinized everything about it very carefully.
And was that the first time you'd seen him or met him, or had you had any contact with him before that?
Really, only formally. When I came down the first time, Jim Donovan introduced me to him, and Jim explained what we were doing, and he said that's very interesting and so forth. And from time to time, I would see him briefly, but I never really had an opportunity. Can't say that I honestly one-on-one ever worked with him.
Right.
I would just see him at the office.
Right. Well, and
Say, how do you do?
He was big cheese.
Yeah, he was way. I was the lieutenant
Right.
in the Navy, and so I was pretty far down the pecking order there.
Right. Do you remember anything about the screening? I mean, you described the defendants and how they reacted once it was played in the trial. When you're screening it for Jackson and his team, how did they react to it?
Well, they see I don't remember the details as much as I think there were like 2 screenings. I think the first time that there was some things that they objected to that they thought were extraneous to the specific points that they were making, and that we had to remove. I don't remember them all. I remember one was about the we had in there the Nazi Air Force attacks in Spain, and for some reason they thought that this only had to be about, in a sense, World War II. Some of these things I thought were fine points. I personally didn't agree with. I didn't see why that wasn't also, after all, that what they did in Spain, what Hitler did and the Luftwaffe did in Spain, I thought was pretty clearly a war crime, but it did not fit specifically into what they were. They didn't actually charge him with that in the trial, so it didn't go. There were things like that, and like the July 26th that I had tried to work in that they would remove, so that they were watching it in terms of what are they actually charging the defendants with.
Right. Well,
and so it was somewhat whittled.
Right. Those are lawyer
down.
concerns.
Yeah. They were very lawyerly. Ben Kaplan, well, and it drove me crazy with these little. I felt it was all little nitpicking things that and I was looking at the sweep of it really, and they were looking at these little points that they specifically were not bringing that particular point in the charge, I guess.
What about the emotional power of it? I mean, this is probably the first time that they are seeing this kind of.
They were impressed, and Jackson. I felt that we overcame a good deal of this. I had the feeling always of that they were really uncertain about whether this was really proper somehow, and whether it wouldn't look like just propaganda or not legalistic enough. But I think that when they saw how it did fit into each one of those 4 major charges, that I felt that Jackson was then willing, in a sense, to underwrite it, which he had to do, of course, or we couldn't present it. We were entirely at his command.
Right. And then he was present in court when it was played.
Oh, yes.
He sponsored it or presented it.
Oh, definitely in court when it was presented, yes.
Did you watch other parts of the trial? Were you ever present during a witness's testimony or Jackson's opening statement? Or
yeah, I did. I watched quite a few days of it, weeks of it, I would say. And another amazing thing about the trial to me is the Germans being so thorough, kept every single phone call. I don't care who talked to who, whether they talked for hours or 3 minutes. They had every single phone call. And one day, and they were reading off the day that the Wehrmacht marched into Austria, and Ribbentrop called Goering to I guess to see what's going. Excuse me a minute.
Sure, of course. Trial year?
I
At
left.
some point.
So when did I? I left in not the entire year. I was there all the way through 45. I got back in early 46.
Okay.
I got out of the Navy. I think in March. I think it was March 46 when I finally got out.
Okay.
Can I jump in for a second?
Yeah, please.
Robert Story is one of the guys that got us here today. What's your relationship with Robert Story?
I'm afraid almost I don't really remember,
Okay,
frankly.
He
What?
was- He was a prosecutor like Ben Kaplan.
Yeah. I don't. I don't know why I don't remember relating to Robert Story the way I do with Ben and Jim and Jim, reporting our progress to Story. I imagine.
Did you have any dealings with Jackson's son? William Jackson was his dad's executive assistant.
No, I didn't.
Okay.
No, I didn't. The two people, and the only two that I really remember are Kaplan and Donovan,
Okay.
and this psychiatrist. I think his name was Murphy. That I talked with about their personalities and so on.
Did you write the script for the Nazi plan? Did somebody? I mean, there's a talking head there.
Yeah,
Did you write that, or did you just put the movies together?
I pretty much put the movie together. Yeah.
Were you involved at all in that other piece of the movie, the concentration camps? Did you also?
We were, but while I was working mainly on the Nazi plan, there were other people in our unit who were working on the concentration camp material.
And those were American films when they liberated the camp.
That's right. Yeah. Yes, they were.
Okay.
Yeah. We looked at all that huge amount of film on the concentration camps.
Right.
Enormous.
Who was Ray Kellogg?
Ray Kellogg was my immediate officer in the John Ford unit. He was like the executive officer, if it had been a ship. So he was my immediate officer.
Right. And George Stevens, was he involved in that at all?
This is the strangest thing. I'm just writing now something for my secretary. This George Stevens, whom I like very much.
What should I say?
Betsy, you let Tyler in. We were trying to keep Tyler out of here. This is the main. This is going to be a. See if I can read
Okay,
it.
can I have what I should say? I don't want to interrupt.
Have my secretary put this on the AFI database.
Sure.
I find that the computer and the internet really is almost as much of an organ of misinformation as it is information.
Yeah, but I think that's on track.
Anything that I really know personally about
Yeah.
is flawed, is skewed. There's so many. It's just full of mistakes.
That's right.
And one of them is about George
Yeah,
Stevens.
Very, very interesting.
The
It's a small planet sometimes. So that's
The,
whenever
AFI
you talk to him, that's the.
database regarding the Nazi plan demands
About FDR.
to be corrected.
And he.
Henry David.
So George Stevens.
It's on the AFI database. If you look at the AFI database, it will say that George Stevens directed the Nazi plan at the Nuremberg trial. Well, it really should be corrected because it's only going to confuse students forever. For one thing, the Nazi plan had no director. It was not a movie as such. It was not something which the director is directing actors. It was entirely put together from Nazi and SS documentary films. It was assembled. It wasn't directed, and I had been put in charge of assembling. At first, we had teams reaching out through Europe looking for film. We even went to Switzerland to find films that we heard had been smuggled into and hidden in Switzerland, and so forth. Another story. And as I said, I had these two German war prisoners, von Molo and Rhoda, helping me with it. I described all this in an article called the Celluloid News in the magazine, the Screenwriter, which is the organ of the Writers Guild, for August 1946. And students are urged to read this account of the Nazi plan, as it was historic that it was the first, as I think Telford Taylor described in his book, The Anatomy of the Nuremberg Trials. Telford Taylor described it, I think, as the first use ever made of film in a trial, certainly in an international, as that was the first international crime trial. So I repeat that George Stevens, a personal friend of mine and a really fine fellow, was not attached to our OSS project in any capacity. Only our Navy OSS personnel, a team of about a dozen, were involved. The confusion of Stevens may stem from the fact that I believe George was involved in a post-war documentary with my brother Stuart Schulberg. Stuart was in charge of the still photographs for the Nuremberg trial. He was a sergeant on my staff, and I'm responding to the AFI error in detail because of the historicity of the event, and it really deserves complete accuracy and shouldn't be distorted by slipshod reporting. And then it's supposed to mention that students of the Nazi film photographic evidence will find a reference to it on page 200 of the Anatomy of the Nuremberg Trials and so forth. Yeah, it really sort of bugs me that Stevens always gets credit for directing this film, which is a complete misnomer. I don't know. And I'm surprised that Stevens is the head of the AFI. How the hell that got in there like that?
Once that's just, you're right. Once the error is made, it gets repeated over.
Yeah, and see, everybody else picks up on it. Yeah.
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 What was your highlight there at Nuremberg? If that could be classified as a highlight, what was the most meaningful part of your seeing the film actually be shown as evidence?
What that?
Yeah.
Should it be the same?
No, what was the highlight of that period of time? Just sitting there at the Nuremberg, and there's your product.
Yeah. Well, that was one highlight, of course, for my life. Getting the opportunity to watch the major war. Oh, damn! There's Zoe going. Watching these war criminals, watching their crimes unfold on screen. That's a moment I will never forget. Watching their faces and being able to actually just. I didn't watch the screen really because I turned my chair and watched them.
Right.
But one other day that I remember so well, I was starting to describe before. They read, as I said, the trial was so voluminous because of the amount the Nazis really did the prosecution's work for them in a way, because, as you know, everything was ever said. In private, every word that anybody of the top 20 or 30 or hundreds, they had it all transcribed. So there was a morning, Goering was in the witness chair, and they were in the same old uniform but stripped of the medals. And they were reading, and the reader was always in a very dry, totally unemotional voice. Made it sound almost boring in the tone of voice, and yet what he was saying was so explosive. And the contrast always struck me too. And Ribbentrop calls Goering, and he asks how things are going with the Wehrmacht is now crossed, goose-stepped into Austria, and Goering says, "Oh, I'm sitting on the balcony of my what is that called? Not the Dacha. Sitting. It's a glorious day." He said, "I'm being served cold champagne, and I'm toasting to this monumental day. It's one of the happiest days of my life." And so, and it goes on with this like this, and Ribbentrop and everything is going absolutely. He said, "Couldn't be smoother. Everything is great. We're